Hello, everybody, and welcome to week number 5 of the Hearthstone Global Games. My name's Cora Georgiou, and as you can see, Rob is not here. He actually left us for Iceland this week because it's so warm in California all year round that people actually have to pay money and travel to find snow. So instead, I'm joined by TJ this week. TJ, how's it going?
It's going great. I'm looking forward to casting global games. I've been working on it a little bit behind the scenes, as some of you know, but it's fun to cast, and I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Well, it's great to have you here, and we do have 2 awesome matches coming up for you all today. But first, let's take a look at how the Hearthstone Global Games is going to work. It's a marathon of a tournament, and we are currently in Stage 1, week number 5. So 8 groups of 6 teams are currently battling it out in a 10-week round robin. Eventually, we're going to cut that down to 6 groups of 4 teams in a 3-week round robin, and this is all going to lead up to a 16-team single elim top 4 advance to the LAN finals. TJ, I know you said you've been doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work for this. Is it nice to be on the desk for once?
It is. It really is. And I can say that I'm really looking forward to those LAN finals. We're going to see a lot of weeks of play in the group stage, but when it comes down to it, teams are going to be very upset if they don't make it to that LAN finals, even if they make it to phase 2 of the group stage. It's not going to mean anything unless they make it to those finals.
Yeah, but first they do have to get out of their groups in stage 1. It's going to be the top 3 teams per group that will move on to stage number 2. And here we can see Group A. It's a pretty stacked group. You've got Sweden, Brazil, and China. But currently, first and second are Bulgaria and Indonesia.
Oh, yeah, Bulgaria's been showing up to the Hearthstone Global Games. I've been really impressed by them, watching them. And I think the big surprises there, I guess, are China and Sweden. I think a lot of people thought that China was going to be the top team in this group, maybe Sweden as well, since all 4 of the players on Team Sweden are professional players, even housing a world champion in Osaka. So a little bit of a surprising group, but an impressive one nonetheless.
Absolutely. And here we can see Group B, some more really heavy hitters in this one. United States currently a 3-0 match record. Netherlands as well, performing very well, 2-1. UK, they're doing all right so far. Soddle and Raven, I'm sure, are having big plans for the UK. The big story in this group, I think, though, is Romania, down 0-3.
Yeah, they were a team that a lot of people thought because of RDU were going to make it far. I mean, all the players, even like Traxel, Moody, they've been around the competitive scene for a long time, and they've gotten a little bit unfortunate, to say the least, in some of their matches, and it has been rough for them. But hopefully they can bounce back and at least finish off strong. Maybe play upset, since it's looking very, 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 very unlikely that they make it through unless some crazy stuff happens and they get through on tiebreakers.
All right, then we look at Group C. Russia currently number 1 with a 2-0 match record. Argentina, we've been seeing quite a bit on this portion of the HGG broadcast because we've been casting a lot of South America and Southeast Asia. Argentina has been performing incredibly well. New Zealand picked up their 2nd win. And then Spain, Austria, and Australia not doing too hot. I think people expected some really great things from Australia because of how prominent Joen and Naviut are. They haven't been doing too well.
Yeah, it's a little bit surprising there, unfortunate for them. But Argentina, a lot of people have been sleeping on Argentina. They're one of the powerhouses of South America, so it's pretty cool to see them do well and show off their skills. And here's Group D. Hungary at the top of this one. This group sort of really surprised me. Looking at it, you couldn't tell from the get-go what team was going to come out on top. A lot of people would say South Korea because of how strong a lot of the players on their team are. But there was a lot of mysteries around Hong Kong, around Greece, and Portugal because of the facts that they do have some strong players, but they also have a lot of unknown players. And they really haven't stepped it up. But we'll see. There's still a lot of global games left to play. So Group D is going to be one of the most interesting groups to watch as we move forward.
Yeah, this one is very close. And then looking at Group E, we're actually going to be seeing a match from Group E today. It's going to be Chile versus Japan. This is another close one, except for Italy, which has come out of the gate very strong. 3-0 match record. And then the rest of it is sort of all tied up right now. There's no real definitive 2 through 6 spot in Group E.
Yeah, we're going to see if Chile can bounce back in that match that you talked about today. But Italy's pretty cool. They're all on the same team outside of global games as well. So seeing their teamwork come together is pretty cool. And then Group F, Canada is at the top of it all. Canada, even talking with a lot of global games players from other countries, they've said that Canada looks like they're the most well-rounded, that they're the strongest team, and that their deck strategy from week to week has been on point. So I think Canada is probably the team to beat in global games. A lot of people might say it's the US of A, which is probably, what we would say
They're
as
up
well.
there. We're a little biased,
They're pretty
of course.
good, but Canada looking strong.
Yeah, they have a great balance of personalities and competitive players, looking very good for them. And then Group G, this is another one that is really not decided whatsoever thus far. We're going to be seeing a match from Group G. It will be Mexico versus Singapore. So that could actually bump either of these teams into a much better position within this group.
Yeah, Mexico got a close win in their last matchup, so that's going to put them in a little bit of a better spot. But I think it's all on Singapore today. They're one of the teams that has only played one match so far. So we'll see today if they can sort of start to turn around this first group phase and make it into sort of that middle ground for Group G.
Yeah, still anybody's standings, I suppose.
There you go.
In Group G. That's how you fit the casterism into that situation.
It's very interesting, huh?
Yes, very interesting indeed. Then looking at Group H, we have some more interesting results here. Ukraine and Czech Republic 3-0, putting up some spicy match results of their own. Germany is coming into this as really... There was a lot of questions behind Germany. Were they going to perform? And ultimately, they did get their first win this week. They are in the third spot, tied with Philippines right now, but they still have quite a bit of ground to make up. And then Croatia, poor Croatia.
Yeah, they're floating down there at the bottom. They've had some tough matchups, but Ukraine, Czech Republic, two very stacked teams. All 8 players on those two teams have, history in competitive Hearthstone, so pretty big. This is one of the group of deaths that a lot of people were looking forward to, and it's cool to see it shake out in probably a way that not a lot of people expected. I think Germany was one of the teams that people expected to be at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, there was a lot of controversy surrounding Germany going into the global games, and it's still a fantastic team post some of those roster changes. But to see them in the third place spot, they still definitely have a chance to move on to stage 2 of this tournament. But Ukraine definitely just rising to the absolute top of that group very quickly. But let's take a look at our schedule for today. We're going to be visiting groups E and G. Match number 1 is going to be Chile versus Japan, and then match number 2 will be Mexico taking on Singapore. These are 4 rather underdog teams, I'd have to say. We get a lot of those on this broadcast because people don't go into the global games really expecting much from South America or Southeast Asia. Obviously, the European countries are very prominent in Hearthstone, as well as the US and Canada. But you look at countries like Chile, Japan, Mexico, and Singapore, and there's not a lot of very prominent players from these countries.
Yeah, Japan has a lot of players that have competitive history, and they're probably the team out of these 4 that has the most star power. And Japan, as a nation, has a lot of history with competitive card games.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll see if they can muster up and get to the top of those standings. Every team today is sort of in the middle of the pack or at the bottom of the pack, so these wins are important. But take a look at the teams. Chile, Topo Pablo. You may know him from the Summer Championship of Americas last year. Saitama, Nephew, and Machine. But Machine won't be with us today. He let us know very much so ahead of time that he wasn't going to be able to make it. So Nephew is going to play his matches for him, as we'll see later. And over on the side of Japan, Gundam Flame, also at a championship event for the Hearthstone Championship Tour last year. B787, the Asia Pacific Winter Champion for 2017. Tansoku, who was at Last Call in 2016. And then Aqua, who's a player that's pretty well known in Japan. He's a card game veteran.
Yep, this is the more competitive match for today, I would have to say, just looking at the rosters and the players that have more competitive experience. It's actually really great to have you here because you know so much about the Southeast Asian scene, having casted the Thai Major and Singapore. So you know quite a bit about these teams, so it's going to be really great to have your insight. And here, of course, we've got some lovely footage of Chile.
Looks very chilly there. There's some faces.
There sure are, TJ.
Chile is
I think
such a beautiful
there's another
country,
word for those too, but we'll go with faces. And here we can see Japan.
Yeah, Japan. I mentioned it earlier. Japan is a country that has a big history in competitive card games in the past. And Hearthstone, they haven't made a huge splash. We've seen Matsun, we've seen B787. Make it, and Kano make it to sort of that big stage. But these players, they have higher expectations of themselves in global games from speaking to them. So, and they also have a beautiful country. I don't think we're allowed to have that segment without saying that. But
yeah,
they
I
really
think that was in the contracts. But no, I mean, quite honestly, all of these countries are absolutely incredible, and it's great to get to see even just a little piece of these nations. And here we can see the lineups for Chile and Japan. The format does seem a bit confusing, but if you break it down, it's not too difficult. It is unique to the Hearthstone Global Games. So each of the 4 players take 2 classes to themselves. Then from there, it is a best of 5 blind pick conquest match, very similar to what we've been seeing in the Hearthstone Championship Tour and most of the tournaments for the past 2 years. But when it comes down to game number 5, if there is a game number 5, one player will have to repeat, and they will have to then either pick the deck that they did not pick in their first game or that 9th class, which is usually Warlock. So we can kind of always assume that they're not really going to pick Warlock.
Yeah, we've seen it a couple times, but it has been sort of left to the wayside. But this is sort of where it gets interesting, is the fact that each player has 2 decks that they can choose from. And they know before they get into the game their opponent's 2 decks. So there's a little bit of mind games that go on. And there's actually some like depth of strategy that goes on when you're preparing, because you have to shore up your weaknesses with your second deck. You have to understand that you can't have 2 decks that do the same thing as part of your 2 decks in that lineup, because you need to make sure that if your opponent has 2 different styles of decks, that they both just don't counter the 2 decks that you have. So a lot of mind games happen in the deck preparation phase, and so it's pretty cool to see teams try and embrace the format and really try and evolve their strategies week to week.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of changing strategies throughout the Hearthstone Global Games. Obviously, Journey to Ungoro, happening right at the beginning of the Global Games, has meant that it's an ever-evolving format as well as an ever-evolving meta. But here we can see the picks for game number 1 between Saitama and Tansoku. It's actually going to be a Hunter Mirror. Pre-Ungoro, that is something we never would have seen.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I talked about a little bit of mind games, but Tansoku has Rogue, and he's looking at a Paladin, which is probably an aggressive version, and a Hunter, which both are decks that can definitely capitalize if that's a Quest Rogue from Tansoku. So he's sort of forced into a position where he has to pick Hunter, and then Saitama looks at it and goes, well, he's in a position where he has to pick Hunter, and I don't want to play Paladin and Hunter, so I'm going to play Hunter as well. So interesting stuff, but there's actually not too many variations of Hunters right now. They all sort of have the same mid-rangey package, and they just try and scale up the curve as best they can. And so we're probably not going to see much diversity, but maybe we will a little bit, because I've been seeing a lot of Hunters with Flare on the ladder to counter some of the mages.
It's definitely possible. Mexico actually brought an interesting Hunter deck in their first match of the Hearthstone Global Games, so maybe Chile and Japan have followed suit and brought something a little bit more unique in their Hunter decks. And here you can see Saitama and Tansoku getting ready for their games. Obviously, this is a team tournament, so it's very likely that both of these guys are on some form of voice comms with the rest of their teammates to be able to converse with each other throughout this game. So it is 4 players playing separately, but at the same time, they can all figure out plays together. And so you're as strong as your strongest player in this case. And for Chile, I would have to say that's probably Topo Pablo, who we saw in the America's Summer Championships last year in 2016. Japan, however, has quite a few very competitive players.
Yeah, Tansoku, though, I think is one of the best. Because he was actually the runner-up the last call. He was 1 match away from making it to the World Championship, which is
That's
incredible
impressive.
accomplishment. And being in the top 8 point earners for an entire year in your region is also quite an accomplishment. So Gundam Flame also, he's probably one of the players that has the most experience at bigger tournaments, because he was at a championship last year, and he has just been competing a lot recently. So they do have a lot of competitive experience. So we'll see if that's going to help them. But like you said, it's all about your strongest player, because he can sort of carry it through. But if you have 4 strong players, it kind of gets tough sometimes, because you have 4 people all with big voices trying to decide what's best. So sometimes it's better if you have one guy who's sort of calling the shots. But we're going to get into it. Game number 1, Hunter versus Hunter, to start things off.
Hunter x Hunter. And like you were saying, Hunter is a rather straightforward build right now. There's not too much that you can really put in to differentiate one list from another. Maybe a copy of Flare. We saw Mexico with a Curator, I believe, and a Ysera in their first match of the Hearthstone Global Games.
That's weird.
About as unique as it gets for mid-range Hunter builds right now.
Yeah, this match is all about the curve. If one player has a really good curve and one player doesn't have a good curve, or one team in this instance, then the player that doesn't have a good curve is just going to get absolutely blown out of the game. So The matches that I like to see are the ones where each player or each team has a good curve, so that way you can really see what sets the players apart, because then it becomes all about board trading and when to sort of turn the corner and go face and start being aggressive, and identifying when you're the aggressor, identifying when you're the player that needs to play more defensively. So, and right now it looks to be the case where both players have a decent curve, but one player doesn't have a much better start than the other. It's all going to depend, I think, a lot on these animal companion roles, and Misha would be pretty crucial here.
Yeah, it absolutely would. And then if Saitama and Chile can follow up with a strong Houndmaster and several pushes from those companions, that could just be enough to spiral the game out of control very early, whereas Japan does have a nice curve going forward. It's a little bit heavy. It's a little bit slow.
Yeah.
Granted, getting to Savannah Highmane, that's going to be your pretty much your strongest card in the deck.
Yeah.
And one punch from Savannah Highmane to the face has been rumored to just win games. So if Japan can get to that point at a relatively safe life total, they can take board likely and win from then on out. But it is looking like Chile is going to have that more aggressive start.
Yeah, this is a tougher decision here from Chile, whether or not to go for the Crackling Razor Maul that they picked up or Animal Companion. I really like the Animal Companion here just because all of the adapts on Crackling Razor Maul...
Kind of underwhelming.
Yeah, with a Kindly Grandmother, you can't really hope for much because +1/+1, it'll still get traded back into...
Death Rattle 2 1/1s might be okay.
It might be okay, but then you're still looking at, in that case, you'd probably want to trade, and then you get 2 1/1s and they get a 3/2 that's just going to trade into your Crackling Razor Maul. So
maybe better to just save it for potentially Wind Fury or +3 attack on a divisive turn where you could just win the game.
And if you roll Misha there, you basically take complete control of the early game. Huffer comes out, which is not the worst case, but Tansoku actually has a great way. Tansoku in Japan actually have a great way to deal with it with the Direwolf Alpha, and even pick up a 1-drop to throw alongside it just to get more stuff on the board. So this could be the start of a snowball for Japan here.
It's not usual that Huffer is the worst option to come out of Animal Companion, but here it's looking like it definitely was. And the Firefly makes a lot of sense with the Direwolf Alpha from Japan, also with the Alley Cat on turn 1. Just to be able to punch out early damage and get those efficient trades is really valuable for the Hunter. Yeah.
People often find the Firefly inclusion in mid-range Hunter kind of weird. I think Nick Chipper was one of the first players to do it, a player known for being sort of a Hunter expert. And basically with the curve being so important for Hunters, even though Firefly is not a beast, just being able to place something down on turn 1 is so crucial against so many decks. So it's sort of a necessary inclusion just because the 1-drops that Hunter does have at their disposal outside of Alley Cat aren't necessarily the greatest. So they just need stuff to make sure that they always have a play early on in the game, and Firefly fits that bill.
Yeah, fits the curve very well. And importantly, it's given Tansoku the absolute edge that he has needed. Now he's taken the board decisively and looks like he's going to be able to curve out very nicely into that Savannah Highmane.
Yeah, now this is such a weird position for Chile because that Huffer roll really put them in a tough spot because their board was able to be traded up, and now once a board snowballs in a Hunter mirror, it is nearly impossible to get it back without the perfect draws, especially since by the time you manage to stabilize and win back the board,
you've taken too much damage.
You've taken too much damage, and then you're just going to die.
You're just dead, TJ.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Well, not me, but them.
Likely them. I mean, if Deadly Shot hits on the wolf, then you can run your bow into the Houndmaster, but your opponent then has a free turn to play whatever they want. So there's really no turn that Chile's going to have that they can remove Japan's board and develop their own. Hunter doesn't do those fancy things like develop a board.
So I was about to say that Deadly Shot is not good because you have effectively a 66.6% chance to just lose the game if you don't hit the exact target that you need to. But I think what they came to the conclusion of there was that even if Deadly Shot hits the perfect target, they're in a rough spot. And if they play anything else, they're in a rough spot. So they have to take the risk there and go for the play that has, even if it's a small chance, has the potential to get them back in the game. And that's what that was.
I mean, Deadly Shot had a 1 in 3 there to give them a chance. Animal Companion also, if it had rolled Huffer, would have had that chance as well. But Animal Companion is actually going to allow you to develop something relatively cheaply going forward.
Yeah.
So Deadly Shot is going to be a lot less useful later on.
And they can roll into Animal Companion plus Crackling Razor Maul this turn, which has some added benefits there.
And to be fair, Oasis Snapjaw is not the most threatening body for Japan to have developed.
But it's going to be around for a while.
7 health is... it's a bit annoying.
Yeah, that's the first thing that comes to my mind when I think 7 health.
Think,
Everything in the game that has
annoying.
7 health, I'm just like, oh my gosh.
But here's the thing. Okay, so 4
How
mana,
annoying.
7 health, 2 attack? I just don't know about that.
No.
It just seems
I mean, where's the overload?
a bit underwhelming, right? Like, yeah, it's a beast. That's okay, but I just don't know. I don't like it.
Yeah. Here's a little... I mean, I feel like Living Spores is one of the only options that make sense here because Taunt, your opponent's probably going to trade it to the 2-4 anyway.
Yeah.
Just because Leok's so threatening when it comes to Unleash the Hounds or even Tundra Rhino with an Alley Cat or something. You know,
Yeah.
it's such a
You don't
tough
want
card
to
to leave on the
leave
board.
something on the board that gives potentially more power to your opponent.
Yeah, so now they are less inclined to want to trade into this because they'll leave them with the 2 1/1 plants. And so that Leok is more likely to stick around. And, you know, at this stage, with Japan dropping a Savannah High main, they're just not worried about anything. Chile's already at 16 health going into turn 6. This game feels like it's just snowballing out of control for Japan.
Even if they drop their own Savannah High main this turn, they're just too far behind at this point. So it is looking like Japan should be able to wrap this one up pretty quickly.
Yeah, they go with Houndmaster here. They're just sort of getting a free
Conceding
trade.
defeat.
Yeah, I think what they have to do is develop Savannah High main and hope that this Houndmaster is going to carry them to victory. Say they draw Unleash the Hounds next turn. They can Houndmaster their Savannah High main and Unleash the Hounds and maybe clear up the board. But that's just a tough thing to ask for. And, you know, this may be sort of a spot where Japan, you know, tries to set up. Let's see, they have 8 damage on board. If they go with the bow and the hero power, that's 13.
If they were to bow and roll Huffer, they would have 15.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you have to be worried about trading? Is that really something? Or can you just set up 2-turn lethal with your hero power and the bow? I think you go for it.
I think you
Hey,
can.
you got to be worried about Houndmaster, though.
Even if Houndmaster comes down, you will still most likely have enough to push through with Unleash the Hounds the following turn. You have Unleash the Hounds, Animal Companion, and the hero power. So you're most likely always going to have a way to push through to get the bow hit in at the very least, which is all you'll need if you go for that play. Is there any possible way that Chile could have a return lethal on the backside? They go into 7 mana with 9 damage on the board. They
If
could
Japan goes full face, double kill command off the top would be 10.
Yeah.
No, it still wouldn't be enough.
Unleash the Hounds, in this
They
case,
would
with
need
3
a
minutes
hidden
on the board.
coin and a quick shot that isn't in the format anymore.
Yeah. So they're going to have to rely on this Houndmaster. They're going to need something to fill the curve, and Alley Cat's just not going to be enough. So I don't see a way that Chile can get out of this one. I think Japan's going to take the game.
Well, really just this one came down to favorable trade on that Huffer with the Direwolf Alpha and then the Firefly able to fill out the curve for Japan on turn 3. Ultimately, Chile was not able to come back from that one. Even with that favorable Deadly Shot roll, it still wasn't enough for them to actually develop on board and protect their life total in any way. So it's looking like Japan will be able to wrap this one up, but going through the motions anyway.
Yeah. For them, it's about how can we best keep ourselves alive. Houndmaster is 100% coming down in this situation. Has to. They're dead on board if they don't.
Yeah.
And the question for them is, are we dead on board if we don't? And I think that these trades, limiting the amount of attacks, and then going for the Houndmaster, but just not going to be enough at the end of the day. Saitama knows it, throws out the well played. Respect.
Okay.
To the man who has everything, give him more hounds.
Might as well. That's going to be game number 1 over to Japan in the Hunter Mirror. Like you said early on, it's going to come down to an early board battle. And in this case, Japan was able to take it decisively on turn 3, and the game just sort of spiraled from there. Not a fancy one. Nothing crazy really happened. Kind of went the way that we expected it to. But hey, that's Hunter.
Yeah, now you do have to sort of look at the decks there and the deck building for Japan, because they understand how you win with Hunter, and that's by, like we mentioned, the curve. And by having additional 1-drops with the Firefly, by putting, probably a 1-up Direwolf, because Direwolf's not a terribly popular inclusion. But even just having 1 makes your early curve so much more consistent, because you're most likely going to get a 1-drop because of just the sheer amount of 1-drops in the deck. And then you can always use them to trade up with Direwolf, which, if you lose early board as a hunter, you're not going to win the game. Yeah. And so having tools in your arsenal to be able to make sure that you win is a really smart play. So it's a straightforward matchup. So in that case, it comes down to mulligan decisions, deck building, and then, of course, draw on the curve.
Draw on the curve, and that they did. Japan going up to a quick 1-0 lead in this match. And game number 2 is going to be Nephew on the Druid up against B787 on the Mage. B787 was the winter champion for the Asia-Pacific region just this past season. And Nephew is stepping up to the plate and taking Machine's spot in game number 4 today for Chile. So Mage versus Druid, how does this break down right now?
Well, there's a few different types of Druids, and there's a bunch of different types of Mage. So it's hard to say. Druid really only has 2 options, with the aggressive token Druid and then, of course, the Jade Druid, where Mage has...
Giant Anaconda Ramp Druid, TJ.
There you go. That is...
Outlier.
Even though it's not super popular, it is an option, I suppose. But Mage has the Discover, sort of Burn Mage, whatever you want to call it, has Secret Mage, and it also has Freeze Mage, which isn't necessarily as popular now, for example, as it was a couple weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. But it's still there, and a lot of players like to put that in their back pocket and
they might as well
save it for a rainy day. B787 came off of a pretty disappointing performance in the Winter Championship after becoming the Asia Pacific champion, going 0-2 out of the group stage. And a lot of that was due to sort of his mentality when it comes to the decks he likes to play in Hearthstone. He was quoted at the Winter Championship as saying that he would rather bring control decks and lose than bring aggro decks and win. So maybe in a team environment, that'll be sort of, he won't be allowed to play as many control decks, but I can imagine that both of his deck choices coming into the global games would be more control. So if I had to guess, I'd say this is more of a control Discover Mage. But again, we'll have to see the Druid to really get what matchup it is.
Yeah, I mean... Yes, playing your own match and refusing to play aggressive decks, it's an interesting strategy. It clearly didn't work out for him, but maybe in a team format when you have teammates that can pick up the slack by playing those aggressive decks, you can play what your specialty is, in this case, control, every week, and you can play it very well. So the fact that B787 does have a specialty might actually be a good thing for him in this tournament.
It also could throw his opponents off. After talking with a lot of the teams have sort of a guy on their team.
A guy.
Like, he's our guy, He submits the decks every week. He assigns the classes. I know the U.S. does this.
The
with
leadership
Amnesiac.
position.
Yeah. Amnesiac basically just assigns the decks to people.
Okay.
That's why we see Dog playing Pirate Warrior every week. He doesn't do it by choice. He does it because Amnesiac makes him.
If you're not listening to the young savage, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, maybe there's a leader on Team Japan. Maybe it's Tansoku or Gundam Flame, who seem to be the 2 guys with the most competitive experience. And I think Gundam Flame's
he's their anchor.
Their anchor. Maybe they're telling him what to play. So maybe they're trying to throw people off. Maybe he's playing a more aggressive Secret Mage, and in which case Secret Mage actually does well against both types of Druids. And it does well against the aggressive Druids, and it does well against the Jade Druid. So we're going to say it's going to be Jade Druid, and this is going to be a more control version of the Mage, where we can see B787 has both Pyros. Well, Pyros can be both, but Medivh the Guardian's a pretty dead giveaway.
Yeah, Pyros is just kind of an inclusion if you think you're going to be going to a longer game. We haven't really seen elemental mage builds really take off. I've seen some people sort of experimenting with them. But in this case, he's just a value card. He's something that if you have nothing else to play on turn 6 and turn 10, well, at least you have something now.
I'm seeing him pop up in Secret Mages. Most notably, Orange is playing a sort of control-style Secret Mage in China versus EU right now.
He's doing very well with it.
Yeah, he's doing very well with it. He made it to the top 8, and he has Pyros in there. It's the only really elemental in the deck, and one thing that Secret Mage does struggle with, it excels at tempo. What it struggles with is value late game, running out of resources, and Pyros really helps with that because you know that you're always going to have something to play throughout the game with that card. But this is not Secret Mage. This is, like we said, that more control-style mage.
Discover Mage, Gunther Mage, whatever you want to call it.
This one might be even different.
It's possible.
We haven't seen sort of the key cards for that deck. I guess we saw Medivh the Guardian, but we didn't see Cabal Courier.
Meteor.
Meteor. Even Meteor's been being cut lately. Mage is just so flexible right now.
There's so much you can do with it. It's really cool, though. It's great to see because Mage for so long was put in that, okay, you have Tempo Mage with Flame Waker or you have Freeze Mage. So the two very extremes of the Mage class. And now we're sort of blending those together a bit because that Discover Mage does have, early game with Mana Worm, with Arcanologist now, but then you do have all of that late game that you combine with Medivh. So it flexes both ways.
Yeah. And Arcanologist is just such a fantastic card. It's a reasonable body. 2/3s are super powerful right now just because they can test just about everything, especially with the ping. And you know that when you're going up against it, you're like, well, oh man, I killed this 2/3 body, but my opponent still got a secret off of it. So it always just feels rough to play against because you know that if that Discover Mage gets off to a good early start with Mana Worm, Arcanologist, early spells, that you're not done once you get to that early board like you once were, again, with Tempo Mage. They got a ton of value, and they pack a punch once they get to that late game and have so much flexibility with those Discover effects with Primordial Glyph that they can tackle just about every situation.
The Glyph is just such a standout from Journey to Un'Goro, really giving these decks so much power and so much consistency that they just wouldn't have otherwise. And on your point to Arcanologist, even better than Mad Scientist in some ways, because although Mad Scientist drew the spell out of your deck and played it directly, if you played Mad Scientist and had, for instance, only 2 copies of Ice Block in your deck and you had one in play already, it then wouldn't draw anything out.
Yeah.
With Arcanologist, if you have a block in play and you play Arcanologist, you can still fish the other one out of your deck, which means that your density of good draws is going to be even higher.
Yeah.
So you can get to Medivh, Meteor, Firelands Portal, the things that you really want to draw.
It's not as good of a tempo card, but it's actually a better value card if you look at it in those ways. So just more so going into that bucket of value. And talking about the other side of the matchup a little bit with Jade Druid. Jade Druid is often seen as a really good tournament deck, specifically in like last year's standing, because it's got pretty polarized matchups. It gets eaten up a lot of the times by sort of like mid-range decks that can kill it before it gets Jades, but that doesn't run out of gas like aggro decks. Which is a little bit of a different identity than Jade Druid used to have, where it would just get run over by fast decks because it didn't have the defensive tools like it has now with like Earthen Scales, and also aggro decks were just more powerful overall because the aggro tools in previous sets were much better than the aggro tools in Journey to Un'Goro. But against the Discover Mage, it's sort of a race. The Discover Mage has to sort of play a little bit more of an aggressive style just because you can't get to those late stages of the game because you'll just get blown out of the game by Jades. They have so much sneaky armor gain. You think you have them, and then boom, on their 9/9 Jade, they just plopped in Earthen Scales, gain 10 armor, and all of a sudden your Pyroblast isn't going to kill them like you set up 3 turns ago. So it's
rough.
Yeah, it's a pretty weird matchup overall. And right now, B787 and Japan are just not drawing that well. They're giving Nephew and Chile a lot of time to ramp up their mana, to ramp up their Jades. And when you're playing reactive in this matchup, it's not necessarily the best case because eventually they'll just keep playing bigger and bigger stuff, and your spells don't really get bigger and bigger. Fireball's about as good as it gets.
Yeah, to your point, one of the most polarizing matchups in the game right now, I would have to say, is Jade Druid, traditional Jade Druid versus traditional Freeze Mage. Because the burn from the Mage is rather limited now that Emperor's rotated out.
Yeah.
You don't always get that much value off of Archmage Antonidas. And all of that armor gain that comes off of Earthen Scales really makes a huge difference in the matchup of Druid versus Mage. So the early minion damage from the Discover Mage is what really sets it apart from the Freeze Mage, in that you needed to get Mana Worm down early to be able to chip away at the Druid's health total to finish with the burn later on. So they do have that advantage over the Druid in that they do have the early game, but having not drawn it means that it's looking bad.
Now, some of the best Freeze Mage players in the world will tell you that the matchup's pretty reasonable. It's not as one-sided as you would think. Talking about like George C, Dr. Hippie, Laughing.
The Masters.
The
savants of Freeze Mage.
Even Nabiud, who's not usually put in that conversation, but I just want to throw his name into that bucket because he is also a fantastic Freeze Mage player that's often overlooked when people talk about the best Freeze Mage players in the world.
Give him the credit.
I gave him the credit. I just did it.
Good.
But
hope he's watching.
I don't know. Maybe.
Tag him on Twitter.
Maybe.
Get him to check out the VODs.
But yeah, it is a bad matchup. But on this one, the one thing that Druid lacks nowadays, they lost Mulch. So they lack hard removal for must-kill threats. A lot of times the way they deal with must-kill threats is either by having a lot of their small removal, like using a whole turn, like a swipe and a Wrath, to kill off a big minion, or by just putting big taunts in the way or putting big Jades on the board and then killing it the following turn. But that doesn't work so well when you're talking about like Archmage Antonidas, because if you leave that up for a turn, you're probably going to lose your board and you're probably going to be staring at a bunch of burns. So there is like possibilities for Japan to just slam Archmage Antonidas if they have the board lead on 7 and for it to live an extra turn. If Chile were to have like a not so great play going into that turn 7.
Well, and Chile's had a good start up until now. They ramped. They had Jade Generation. Their hand's a little bit heavy. They're likely going to have to commit a turn to drawing with Nourish. And then it's unlikely that they'll have follow-up after that. So I think I would actually like to see them draw this turn and then swipe to clear board, potentially.
Yeah.
Opening up for a bigger development of their own on the following turn. But then that could potentially leave Japan open to just slam an Archmage on 7 and hope that you can get some burn off of it.
Yeah. Nephew's eyes just lit up because he drew Yaxaron. Now, they've only played a couple spells, so the Yaxaron's not that scary.
It's enough for me.
And so far throughout the Hearthstone Global Games, we haven't seen like those blowout Yaxarons that have just changed the course of history, that went back in time, smacked the country that they're playing against, and then took a time machine back to the present time and beat them with it.
Reaped in the victory.
Yeah. But Yaxaron is always that sort of X factor in games that go long, and a lot of times Jade Druid is in those situations where, hey, if I clear the board right now, and then I follow it up with a bunch of Jades, I win. But if I can't clear the board right now, I lose. And so they just Hail Mary the Yogg and hope that it works out that way.
Well, deciding to develop the Jade Spirit does change the course of Japan's turn. So I think that was very wise by Chile. They need to not give up the board because they've been lucky enough to have it up until now. It was unlikely that they were going to be able to develop the board before Japan. So now that they got to this point and they have the resources that they need to continue pushing that board presence, it was wise of them to make that development choice instead of just removing Pyros.
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed.
And now they have a pretty good turn where they can swipe and develop Jade Behemoth. They can clear the board and then 3-6-4-4 and still have one of those 2-3s left over. So I'd like to see them go with that line of play just because it puts the most power on the board and puts them in a reasonable board position. And it looks like they are going to go for that line. It's super clean. They know what this secret is, so they're going to be able to just take control.
It's hard to refuse a swipe that's that good. Just because it's the only AoE that the Druid has access to, really, other than Primordial Drake in the builds now. Sorry, excuse me, Yaxaron into 3 Flame Strikes. But it's still looking at the AoE from Mage, for instance, swipes rather weak. So they got a good one, so it was good.
I think what Jade Druid really needs is like a way to imprint their Jades on the board while also dealing AoE.
Yeah.
Just bear with me for a second here.
Okay.
A card called Jade Slam, okay? Where all your Jades on the board, all Jades you summon this turn, slam. That's the card.
They slam themselves?
Yeah, they just slam.
They slam
the other minions.
The opponent?
Just whatever they feel like slamming. Just Jade Slam.
Like
So
Okay.
I'll give you an example here of how this card would be used.
Great.
So say your opponent has 3 minions on the board and you
Gotcha.
have no minions.
That's bad.
You play Jade Slam, which probably costs like 0 mana.
Of course.
And then you play your Jades and they slam.
Okay.
That's my idea for the card.
Okay, I see. You joined the esports team, right?
I did.
Not Team 5?
Not the design team, no.
Okay.
Maybe one day.
It's possible. Stranger things have happened, I suppose.
Yeah, no Jades in hand right now, so Jade Slam wouldn't be good.
No,
but
it would be bad. Which that's why it's 0 mana, because sometimes it's not very good.
Yeah, it's like Innervate in a way. But this turn they can go with Fandral plus Feral Rage to clear up the board. Fandral is not necessarily a must-kill like it once was. There's really not too many cards that benefit from Fandral anymore. It's Feral Rage, Nourish, and Wrath are basically the 3. In this case, they also have Druid of the Claw. I think Druid of the Claw is one of the lower impact ones. But it's not like in the
Tier
case...
4 impactful.
Yeah, it's not one of those ones like Raven Idol where it can completely, change the course of the game because they can Raven Idol, get a minion and a spell, and then use that spell to, get a Wrath, and all of a sudden they're drawing another card. So in this case, though, Druid of the Claw ends up being pretty good. Sort of serves a very similar purpose as the Feral Rage would have. But in this case, they can save damage to their face and use the Feral Rage later for just strict armor gain. So I actually like this play. That's not a good draw.
No, it's not. It's a nice tech choice against, Warrior Paladin, but against Druid, you're not going to get much out of the Gluttonous Ooze.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's just shaping up to be a pretty subpar hand for Japan. They've got some burn, they have some minion development, but not enough of any one thing to really give them a game plan.
Yeah. I think it's almost get to the point where Japan has to sort of go for a Hail Mary here and start either throwing damage at the face and hoping that they can get there, or maybe, playing Archimage Tinnitus and Frostbolting the highest power thing on the board and hoping that either they have to trade a bunch into it or that, well, it's never going to stick around. But I guess hoping that they have to trade a bunch of stuff into it and maybe Primordial Glyph off the top. But it's at the point now where they have to find alternative win conditions because they're not going to win by just trying to remove all this stuff from the board. Because Jade Druid is almost always going to have stuff to develop behind it. And so I think that the plan here is going to have to be hope that they have the burn.
Oh, that's going to be it. Chile is down to 17, so they are within range if Japan is able to pick up Pyroblast, an additional Fireball. It's not out of the question that they'll be able to burn them out. The Nourish pickup, however, that's quite good. It's going to dig them even deeper into, well, how about 2 copies of Earthen Scales? That's not bad.
Yeah, that's a ton of armor. And the one thing about Japan's play is that it telegraphs their hand pretty heavily. Chile is thinking right now, well, either their hand is really awkward and the only way they can win is by going for the Hail Mary, or their hand is all burned. And so their game plan here can be, I don't want to say linear. They just know what they have to do here, and that's make sure that they're gaining enough health to be able to survive all the extent of the burst while still developing enough depression.
Okay, any read you can get on your opponent's hand is a good read. And in this case, it's going to be enough information for Chile that they're able to just put down that first Earthen Scales, put themselves out of reach of anything that B787 could possibly play this turn. And then they have an additional 8 with Feral Rage and, goodness knows how much from the Earthen Scales off of a Jade over the following couple of turns. That'll pretty much keep them out of range of everything.
I see.
Yes.
So Japan picks up Arcane Intellect, which normally in a late game situation like this would be okay. But at the moment, it's kind of just filling up their hand with more stuff that they don't have the mana to utilize and don't have the time because of the pressure to make use of. So, oh man, Flame Strike just feels so bad here. It clears off one thing, and that's a Gadgetzan Auctioneer, and you're not getting any further towards the win condition that you tried to set up for yourself in the last turn.
I mean, it makes sense to use it over Frostbolt or Medivh's Valet, plus a hero power to kill the gadget, because those are flexible and can go face. So it's bad, but it's the best of the underwhelming plays that Japan had here.
Sure. Yeah. Now, Chile still has both Innervates left in their deck, and their deck is starting to get to a point where it's pretty low. So Gadgetzan Auctioneer actually has a very high chance to hit an interval.
TJ, you're psychic.
Yeah.
I think a high chance to pick up Wild Growth as well.
Yeah.
Darn it.
Nah.
That's close.
Just not as good at calling it. But
It's
that's
okay.
why I like the Gadgetzan Auctioneer play there, and even the getting that Jade Idol out, just because of the fact that they had so much opportunity to hit an Innervate from their deck. So nice job by Chile there, sort of reading what's left in their deck. And
Plus, they sort of committed to that line on the last turn with the first gadget.
Yeah.
Sort of assumed it would be removed. I mean, they knew that Japan had a Fireball in hand from Antonidas. So you get the first one down, remove it, maybe the second one sticks.
yeah. But now they don't have that sort of infinite engine left with Jade Idols. They will get to it eventually. But at the moment, they don't have a way to sort of put a bunch of Jade Idols in their deck on one turn and then draw a bunch of them on the same turn, since they've used both Gadgets and Auctioneers. So Japan can realize this and start trying to clear up the board and hope that there's not many Jade minions left, because we've seen Jade Spirits, we've seen Jade Behemoths. So they can try and go for that route where they just sort of start removing stuff on the board and hope that they eventually, that Chile eventually has a turn where they don't play anything, and then they can develop like Alexstrasza or the 10 mana Pyros. But man, that's such a hopeful plan. And
It's possible. In this case, it looks more likely than
gross.
killing your opponent, who's now at 14 armor, 17 health, with one copy of Earth and Scales and a copy of Feral Rage left in their deck. This is bad, but it's probably their only chance.
Yeah,
Excuse me, you are on fire.
agreed.
He's so polite.
Well, Jade Blossom is another Jade. I just want to see him rip the Yogg here.
Flare, Pyroblast your opponent.
I mean,
Win game.
to be honest, this is global games. Like, it's all about the spirit of competition and the spirit of Hearthstone and bringing people together from across the world using Hearthstone. And what better way to unite an entire country and to inspire players from across the world to play Hearthstone by just jamming a Yogg when you're ahead,
TJ, I think that's the most inspirational thing you've ever said. At least that I've been in the room for.
That's probably true, because I don't usually say inspirational things.
That's pretty good, though.
Yeah,
I want to, man, put that
Unfortunately,
in the
they
Global
don't-
Games handbook.
yeah. Unfortunately, they don't go for it, but I'd still say
There's
they're in
still
a pretty
hope.
favorable position. So they're just going to make a 7/7 and an 8/8 instead.
I think that's also good. It doesn't give them the chance to win this turn like a Yogg Saron into Flare Pyroblast opponent's face would have just won them the game. But I think this is also, pretty much going to get them to the same spot.
Yeah, this is okay. All right, so Primordial Glyph is picked up.
But screw that. We're playing Pyros.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Japan just has to hope that this 10/10 Pyros sticks. Maybe they can sort of chain together some ice blocks and eventually win the game. But I feel like Japan is sort of on autopilot here, and they understand that this is a pretty much lost game, and so they just want to enjoy their 10/10 Golden Pyros while they can.
It looks so nice.
Yeah. But Chile is going to be able to pop the block at 1 here. They're also going to be able to gain 9 armor. They actually can gain 8 more. They actually can gain 9 more
With hero power.
if they wanted to. But they're just going to go ahead and develop some minions onto this board. So,
Take it slow.
yeah.
No rush.
And it's going to take even more than a miracle for Japan to be able to win this one.
Well,
2 miracles, maybe.
maybe they can work 1. I don't know about 2. That
Yeah.
seems like you're asking a bit much.
Yeah. But no lethal presented at the moment. And they've used both swipes. So they can't get there yet unless they want to rip the Yogg Saron. I mean, at this point, there's not going to be a better opportunity. You have 42 health.
What's the likelihood that you Pyroblast your own face 5 times?
It's very low.
I don't think it's going to happen. If this was Disguised Toast, he'd play the Yogg. He would have played the Yogg 3 turns ago.
Just do it, nephew. Looking promising.
I don't know. I mean, you could also just, play the Primordial Drake, hit face, make it 10-10, or 9-9 in this case with the Jade Idol, and then probably just win next turn.
Yeah. turn.
or you could trade.
Yeah, this
And
play
also just win next turn.
this play is probably the best on the board, but to be honest, Japan actually has a way to deal with this. I mean,
Well, this is actually interesting.
yeah, so if Japan picks up another piece of removal that can deal with this Primordial Drake on the board, then they can get into a position where Chile, I talked about it, Japan can just try and remove everything on the board and hope that Chile eventually finds that turn where they develop nothing. I talked about how Guided Jade and Auctioneers were both used, so they can't get to that point where they're shuffling Jade Idols and building Jades onto the board in the same turn.
Oh.
Mirror Image can block damage.
Can you isolate a Vaporize? With Volcanic Potion, Polymorph. The Tark Reaper's at a 3/3 right now. No, you wouldn't be able to do it. Fireball Poly could do it.
I
But
can
then you could
isolate a
set up
Vaporize if
Vaporize.
you know what I'm saying.
I have absolutely no idea what you're saying, but I've also had
Me neither.
pretty much no idea what you're saying. I'm still trying to figure out Jade Slam, TJ. I'm sorry, I just don't know.
It's a simple concept.
If you insist.
The Jade just slam. But they aren't
The
going to...
Yogg line is looking more and more okay.
Yeah, well, this is lethal presented for Chile if they attack in to face with the Primordial Drake first and realize this, and they are.
Good players, good players.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Japan, the bluff is not going to work, and that's going to be Chile taking game number 2, tying up the series at 1 apiece. No Yogs are on use, but not needed in this case, and a smile from Nephew.
Good to see. This is the first of 2 games that he will have to play if this goes to game 4, which it will now, because this is tied up at 1-1. And while it did seem a little bit risky with the Vaporize there for Japan, it did make some sense because then B787 had the Polymorph for a Jade that Chile may have played that turn, and then could have played something else alongside it. So if he just went ahead and used the Polymorph, would have had absolutely no more removal. Maybe that wouldn't have won them the game then.
Yeah.
So it took the very, very small chance that Chile makes a mistake, attacks in with the Golem into the Vaporize, and then maybe Japan's got a chance there.
Yeah, I feel like, that matchup's pretty tough from the Major's perspective if they don't hit the ground running with a good board early on.
They were walking. It was like a mall walk. It was pretty slow.
No Mana Worms. They did have Arcanologist early on, but in this matchup, you need to sort of force the Druid to use those defensive options early on just to stop taking damage.
If you can knock them off the ramp plan by forcing them to use Wraths and Swipes early on instead of Wild Growth Jade Blossom, you're in a great position.
Or by just forcing them to use, say, Earth and Skulls to trade up, or Fell Rage to remove. Then you get to the point where later on, all of a sudden, your burn becomes much more relevant. But there you can see the win from Nephew. And now it's going to be about Topo Pablo and Aqua. See who's going to be able to come out ahead or put their team in the lead moving forward into game number 4. And Priest versus Druid is going to be the matchup. Now, if that's an aggressive Druid, this could be a tough matchup because Priest is one of the decks that deal with that deck the best because of Potion of Madness, because of Dragonfire Potion, and just because a lot of times they can deal with that early board the best with Shadow Word Pains. They can pick apart the board.
Yeah.
But Aggro Druids can still, blow out a game against any single deck out there if they get Innervate and big stuff. Small stuff that turns into big stuff. Idiots.
Well,
Plebs.
If you're looking at that from the other way, if Aqua were to have brought Jade Druid, which I think is probably the more popular of the Druid builds.
For global games, at
for
least.
global games, at least. And then Pablo has a Control Priest, which we've been seeing some of. Maybe it gets off to such a slow start. He's got Dragon Priest, however. You said that the Jade Druid generally struggles against mid-range decks.
Yeah.
And the Dragon Priest can get off to a reasonable start on board, build up the stat lines so the Druid can't remove those mid-range minions, and then just sort of swarm the game from there.
Yeah, and we'll see. It's all about the archetype in this situation. Can't really make deck calls like this without seeing the actual deck. We can
put in the 2 cents. We can analyze, sort of.
Yeah, but we could talk about how the players are feeling right now.
How do you think they're feeling, TJ?
They're probably pretty tired
Let's take
because
a
it's
look.
morning in Asia, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's Well, Chile, it's not too late in Chile yet. But there's Topo Pablo, the man himself.
I feel so bad because he's on my friends list. And every time I run into him on ladder, I think he thinks that I can speak Spanish, and I cannot. Because I casted his match at America's Championships last summer. He had a translator, and I interviewed him. I thought I made it very clear that I did not speak Spanish, but every time I play him on ladder, which is quite frequently, he messages me on the friends list and is always messaging me in Spanish. And I'm like, oh God, I have to Google Translate this, or I have to blow him off. And I don't want to blow him off. He's a nice guy. But it's a little bit, it's relaxing to be able to cast one of his games and not have to worry about speaking Spanish now.
Well, there you go.
There's my story.
People at home, if you
Cool
ever play
story,
against
Cora.
Cora on ladder, just add her afterwards and start speaking Spanish.
Please don't.
There you go.
I just can't do it.
People don't usually know who I am when I play them on ladder.
Osmo Cutie?
Well, no, I play on.
Is it just Osmo?
It's just Osmo on Hearthstone.
As opposed to on something not Hearthstone.
Yeah, I was about to say on Blizzard, but I feel like that was a little bit harder to understand than on Hearthstone.
Okay.
But yeah, so a lot of times I'll add people after and be like, "Good game," and they'll be like, "Who are you?"
Yes, because that's the first thing I ask to anybody that I just played against on ladder.
That
Who
actually
are you?
is the first.
HQ741.
Yeah, you found my alt account, HQ741. That's the other deck. That's the other account that I play on Blizzard.
Now it's public.
Yeah, but looks like this is going to be a Jade Druid from. Actually, we don't know for sure yet. We can make an educated guess, an hypothesis.
Hypothesize.
I mean, a hypotenuse.
That's different.
We can make a hypotenuse and say that
That's triangles.
that Japan is playing Jade Druid, but it could be a Ramp Druid still.
It's possible. It's probably Jade Druid. And it looks like Topo Pablo has the Dragon Priest.
Yeah, and Dragon Priest actually can hold its own against Jade Druid because they, like you said, can get to that point where they're just plopping down a bunch of mid-range stuff, and eventually they can overwhelm, take control of the board, isolate those Jades, and protect the minions that they have on board with heals, powered shields, by using Shadow Word Pain and Shadow Word Death to remove stuff off the board and put pressure. It's a matchup that a lot of times takes a while for the Priest to win, but it's sort of like that inevitability where as long as they can keep the pressure on before the Druid gets to the point where they just can set up a lethal with 10-10, 11-11, 12-12, then they'll be in a good spot. And at the moment, I like the way that Topo Pablo's hand looks.
It's shaping up to be quite good, doing exactly what the Dragon Priest needs to do at this point. He's going to put those large mid-range minions on board with the reasonable stat lines, not going to be able to burst down the Druid by any means, because that's just not what Dragon Priest does, but enough repetitive attacks from a Twilight Drake and a Priest to the Feast, and, well, Japan's just going to spend the first 5 or 6 turns ramping and making small Jade boards that are rather insignificant.
Yeah.
Also, I just have to point out, Aqua's hair it's beautiful. I mean, that is like the perfect anime hair right there. And I know you're not an anime fan yourself, TJ, but it's pretty good.
This is true. I've never watched anime. I trigger a lot of people.
Maybe Naviute could educate you in the art.
Yeah, I actually wrote an anime starring Naviute.
Okay. And his shorts.
Yeah, his power comes from his shorts. And the whole anime is based off the premise that a lot of evil villains come and try and steal his shorts.
That's nefarious.
Yeah, and he just gets himself into all sorts of shenanigans.
Naturally.
It's got like a...
Is he in high school in this anime?
Middle school, actually.
Okay,
and
that's fair.
It sort of has like a Friends feel, the show Friends.
I'm familiar with it, yes.
Yeah, it's got like a sitcom-y vibe. It's really interesting. One day I'll publish it. But
maybe Tempo Storm can animate it for you.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen oh gosh, what was it called? The In Crowd?
Frodance Deck Techs?
Oh no, I have seen Frodance Deck Techs. They're good stuff.
Yeah, the In Crowd. Yeah,
that's
and it'll be in that style, but
okay.
Yeah, it's
I like it.
Yeah.
That sounds like a moneymaker to me.
So Topo Pablo and Chile actually picked up the Ysera. Now Ysera's going to be a great late game card, but Bookworm actually has a surprising amount of value in against Jade Druid because there's a lot of those you know, 3 or less attack minions in the deck, you know, outside of the Jades.
Yep.
So you
Jade
have the
Behemoth.
Fandral, you have Jade Behemoths. You'll always be able to pick up Jade Spirits. You'll be able to pick up the Jades once as they're smaller. Even Tar Creeper, which is always a 1 of, usually a 2 of in the Jade Druids that we've seen. So
Plus, you just have to think, are you going to be able to get to turn 9? And is Ysera going to win you the game? Or if you get to turn 9, like, will you have made enough of an impact for Ysera to win you the game? Or would a Bookworm have been more helpful?
yeah, you know, Ysera, if you can get to the point where you're dropping in and you're not behind on the board, or if you're ahead, then it's great because it can provide you extra burst in the form of Nightmare Ysera Awakens. Dreaming a Jade is actually really powerful.
good.
Yeah, because a lot of times Druids rely on those Jades to be able to trade off the board next turn. So even though, you know, it's not like the craziest, it's not a taunt minion or whatever, it's still a great minion to have to dream because a lot of times they're making those Jades for really cheap because they're sort of getting it for free, or Jade Idol, Jade Blossom. And so putting it back in the hand actually makes it cost more. So it's a very impactful tool.
If you dream a golem above 10/10,
I think it's just
is
always,
it just 10 mana?
Yeah, I think it's just always 10 mana.
So eventually that'll get really valuable again. 10 mana 30/30 is pretty good, but 9 mana 9/9, not quite as good as 1 mana 9/9. Like 8 mana worse, I would have to say. Roughly.
Strictly better.
True.
Time waits for no one.
A lot of people get triggered when I say strictly better.
Why is that?
I don't know. Because strictly better is sort of a trap phrase in Hearthstone because nothing is ever really strictly better than another thing. Just because of, you know...
There's so many variables, TJ.
The smart guy in the room will always challenge you. So, like, whenever I say strictly better around Brian Kibler, he's always like, well... And then he says something that makes it so it's not strictly better.
See, I just wait until Natalie's around, and then she's like, Brian, why don't you ever stop talking? And I'm like, Natalie, thank you. She's a good time.
And then
But also, he's usually just right.
I say, Brian Kibler, why do you ever stop talking? Don't. Please.
Well, this has kind of gone the way that we expected it to. The Dragon Priest was able to put out a lot of high health minions, and the Druid has spent 6 turns now just ramping up mana and playing insignificant minions that have done nothing.
Yeah, it's a race against the clock here.
Strictly worse
Yeah. Losing is strictly worse
than winning. That's a
than
fact.
winning.
That
Right.
has to be a fact, right?
Nope.
Shoot.
Well, there are some formats where you want to tank matchups, but
That's true.
We'll get to that in a later episode of Global Games. But at the moment, you know, Japan had the opportunity there to go for Gadget and Auctioneer and start drawing cards, but they really just have to start picking apart the board. And in order for them to pick apart the board, they have to go a little bit wider and start softening up these minions so they can use their removal a little bit more effectively. Because while they can't deal with, you know, a bunch of those medium-sized minions, all of a sudden if it becomes a bunch of medium-sized damage minions, then maybe their removal starts to get a little bit better.
Double potion this turn is really sweet.
Yeah, it definitely is. And they can just trade in that 1/2 that's not doing too much, still push that 8 damage, still keep their Twilight Drakes healthy.
Whew.
And this is the exact same situation that we talked about when we were introing this matchup in particular, the Dragon Priest versus the Jade Druid, where if they build up this board with a bunch of medium-sized stuff, eventually they're just going to be able to keep putting damage every single turn and push the Druid out of the game.
Well, this is really where the weakness of the Druid not having any way to combat boards of mid-range minions really shows through. Before on Goro, they might have been forced to mulch just a Draconid operative, or any of these Twilight Drakes would have been necessary mulch targets, but now they don't even have access to that.
Mulch is gone.
See you later, mulch.
So now they got to kill things the old-fashioned way.
Minion to minion combat.
Exactly. And while they excel at minion-to-minion combat once it gets later in the game, this is effectively turn 7. That's not late game for most decks, especially not Jade Druid. So, and this is really tough because none of these minions are going to be able to get removed this turn. They cannot remove a minion unless they pick up an innervate. And eventually this stuff is going to get healed up. Now, Primordial Drake is one of the things that can help them come back because it's hard for Priest to get through that without actually just like jamming a bunch of minions into it because it's got that 4 attack.
Yeah. The Priest killer.
If their board is big enough, they can just get through it and then start healing up. So it's a really tough situation in that regard. And so Topo Pablo and Chile here, they have the opportunity to pick up a Dragonfire Potion with the Shadow Visions and still use it if they have one of those in their deck, which I'm sure they do. But that's not one of them. So going to be a little bit tougher. This, or even a Shadow or Death would have been great here.
Yeah, you just need some way to remove the gadget. If you're just looking for Shadow or Death, you could take the second Shadow Visions and try and go for it again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think at this point with the mana that they've already spent on the first one, I think that's going to have to be the plan. But if they don't pick up the Shadow or Death here, then that might be a situation where they have to double trade in this Gadgeting Auctioneer. And they get the Dragonfire Potion, which would have been a good option last time, but it's not a good option this time. So they don't see a Shadow or Death. And now they have to double trade in this Gadgeting Auctioneer because it's a must-kill minion that's on the board. Maybe Japan's going to have an opportunity to start removing some of these minions.
This is going to be...
That hurts. That's a big deal.
I mean, this certainly makes the Primordial Drake a lot stronger. It means that anything that Topo Pablo has on board will likely have to be run into the Drake. At least the 2 Twilights in this case.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no Circle of Healing in deck.
I think double swipe here is...
That's pretty good. Double swipe hero power.
Double swipe hero power clears the board, but doesn't develop anything. Now, their Jades at this point are 4/4, so we're starting to get to the point where they're turning the corner.
They're challenging.
Yeah, but you just saw 2 Shadow Visions, and you know that this deck's probably going to run Dragonfire Potion. If you don't remove these minions and just go for the board, and Dragonfire Potion can just blow you out of the game. So I feel like they removing the minions here is top priority. Strictly better.
Oh, poor Twitch chat. Yeah, I mean, double swipe hero power is the clean clear. Single swipe plus a Jade Behemoth. The Behemoth would have challenged board had Pablo not had a pain effect. So, I mean, maybe developing is good there as well. But like you said, public enemy number 1 is going to be this board. If you clear it off, then you have to start developing on the back foot, except your minions are likely bigger than your opponents now. So maybe this is the better line.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it's strictly better. I'm going to qualify that.
Okay. Well, Ysera hits the board, and this is sort of payoff for the decision that they made early on in the game to go with Ysera over something that they could fit in their curve a little bit earlier. So now Japan doesn't have the choice. They were hoping that maybe Chile would have had a little bit of a missed turn there. And they would be able to develop into not very much. But Ysera's sort of like one of their worst nightmares.
Instead of their dream.
Yeah.
Well.
But they still just don't have a choice. Dragonfire Potion can still blow them out of the game here, but they really don't have anything else that they could do in this situation, so they just have to go for it.
They're backed into a corner.
Yeah. But now they're at the point where their Jades outlive the Dragonfire Potion. So if they make it through this turn without taking too much damage or losing too much on the board or too much control on the board, then all of a sudden they've turned the corner. But it's all about this turn, and Chile has to realize this. And maybe you go for the Shadow Visions into the Dragonfire Potion. Primordial Drake is also an option, but it doesn't clear off too much of the board here. Your Primordial Drake just gets traded into with these Jades. But maybe that's the best option that they feel.
Maybe it guarantees you 2 more Ysera cards.
Yeah.
Maybe you get Ysera Awakens, and then you can combine that with a Dragonfire Potion.
But, I mean, to be honest...
Be honest with me, TJ.
Dragonfire Potion is not getting much better.
No,
I
it's
mentioned
not.
that their Jades are now out of range of Dragonfire Potion. So maybe that was the last turn that card was going to get an insane amount of value for them. Because now if they pick it up next turn, all of a sudden it doesn't even hit the Jades because they're 6/6s. So
well, if I mean, that could be part of the reason why the Northshire Cleric was played down. Obviously, any amount of card draw off of the Cleric would be great, but
Yeah.
if an additional Jade comes down and it's 6/6, you can just trade the Cleric and go for the Dragonfire to clean up that board. So, yes, they're out of range, but not so far out of range that you can't still combine a couple of cards and get them off that board.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. But I don't know. It's going to be tougher for them to find use for that card as the matchup moves on. And Shadow Visions, while it can hit Shadow or Death if they have a second one, the card is not getting that much value anymore because they really don't have any key spells that they want to hit. So this is actually going to be a nearly full clear. The Northshire Cleric is going to be up, but your Sarah's removed. The Primordial Drake's removed. And I feel like Chile maybe had a missed opportunity here. While Shadow Visions wasn't guaranteed to find Dragonfire Potion, it was very likely, especially with the Shadow or Death being picked up the previous turn.
Well, I mean, Chile's not hurting for resources here, but they need to find their way back onto the board. How are they going to be able to kill Japan at 19 with Armor Gain still in deck with limited minion resources? It does seem like they may have missed their best opportunity.
This jungle hides many secrets.
I'm upset.
Don't take it personally, TJ. It's not your fault. They didn't have Yogg-Saron in hand. They couldn't have possibly played it.
I mean, maybe they have some grand scheme here.
I mean, to be fair, they were disappointed by the 2 Shadow Visions that they had played previously. Maybe they just didn't want to go all in on hoping that they'd get that Dragonfire Potion.
I actually think it might have been guaranteed once they pick up the Shadow or Death. Oh, no, it wasn't the second Shadow Vision, so they weren't guaranteed, but it was pretty likely.
Well, this
That they
nets
picked
them
up
an Ungoro
Dragonfire.
pack. Maybe that was on their mind.
Yeah, it's a possibility, but Ungoro packs, while great amount of value, they're not always super reliable. They pick up Corrupted Mist, Sunkeeper Tarim,
Pyros and Venom Weapon. They have no weapons.
and then the 7-mana 4/8 with
Stormwatcher.
Wind Fury. Sure,
It's okay.
that guy.
Well, importantly, Pablo burns the rope, is unable to play the Northshire Cleric, and I believe will burn a card next turn. That could be bad. If he burns Dragonfire Potion, there's your potential AoE cleanup gone.
Well, we'll see. I feel like there's a lot of cards that are pretty
Underwhelming.
still left in the deck. Bookworm.
That wouldn't have been a bad one.
Yeah, they do have a dragon in hand, actually, the Emerald Drake.
Actually, Corrupting Mist is really good. Okay, maybe not really good, but it's okay.
Corrupting Mist just sort of has the inherent flaw of it also hits your minions, and then it's a telegraphed removal, so your opponents can plan against it.
Well, you can just tear them 3 minions.
And it's not like Doomsayer, where like Doomsayer is sort of a proactive. Japan could still develop minions that wouldn't be hit by Corrupted Mist, and then all of a sudden, Japan or Chile doesn't want to develop more minions that are going to get hit by it. It's just, while it's okay, it's not the best. It's just it's inherently a kind of weak card.
Quickly. Ungoro belongs to the light.
Now Sunkeeper
Oh, this is
Terror.
quite good.
That's pretty dang good. It's like strictly better than Corrupted Mist.
Strictly better.
So Japan planned for this last turn. They actually shuffled Jade Idols into their deck. It didn't develop one, so this is very likely to hit. Well, I was going to say it was very likely to hit at least one, but that's not the case. And this is a point of weakness. They're only developing 1 Jade this turn, which means they're vulnerable to Shadow or Death.
Jade gets deathed, then they can Chile can develop either Emerald Drake or, hey, you can put down a Stormwatcher behind it if you really want to. Stormwatcher plus Nightmare has Wind Fury. That's 18 damage, DJ.
That is. And now, I actually think that Feral Rage had value there over the Jade Blossom, because it's better to build Jades in bulk against Priest than build 1 Jade at a time, just because it gets isolated by Shadow or Death. And then next turn, you could go with Aya Blackpaw plus the Jade Blossom after you see the development. Because now they just have no board, and they still left one additional minion on the board. Oh, man.
This is awesome.
Stormwatcher. What a weird card.
You know, it's okay in Arena sometimes.
I don't even think so. I
It's
don't even think that's true.
It's okay
I don't believe you.
against Priest sometimes.
Is that what constitutes a good card in Arena?
It is okay.
Well, it's okay
If
against
I'm
Priest
given-
sometimes.
If I'm given the option of Stormwatcher and 2 other worse cards, I'll pick Stormwatcher. I've picked it like once.
Yeah, that's just game, isn't it?
It's awesome.
Yeah, that's well above game. That's pretty crazy, actually. And Topo Pablo gives
Bam,
the old Topo
Stormwatcher's
Pablo
meta.
smile, kind of. And Chile takes a 2-1 lead in the series.
All right, well, I said, how are they going to possibly kill Japan from 19 health? Wind Fury and Nightmare is one way to do it.
Yeah,
You know what? It wasn't easy, but they got there.
Yeah, I feel like Chile still, that Dragonfire turn where they could have gone for the Dragonfire potion could have been a misstep. Japan had a potential there, say if they had gotten 2 Jade Idols from that Nourish, which they had shuffled 3 in their deck before, plus had one additional one, I believe. And they had like 10 cards left. So they could, even a Jade Idol plus a Jade Blossom, if they developed 2 that turn, I think they would have been home free from that matchup because they had the armor gain from Barrel Rage. They had Gadget and Auctioneer to shuffle even more through. So if that Nourish had been a little better, I feel like Japan could have, turned the corner and took that game. But
They just needed one more body on board to be able to then kill the Stormwatcher. Chile only had the 1 copy of Shadow or Death. Yeah, it's very likely that from there they would have had the cycle and the additional minion pressure from more Jade Idols to be able to win the game. But ultimately, it worked out that Chile got a win off of the Ungoro pack, and now it's up 2-1. Chile over Japan. Nephew going to be coming in for the 2nd time. He's going to be playing the Rogue, and Gundam Flame is going to be on the Paladin. I've been having a lot of fun playing Paladin. Right now, it's so flexible. There's so many different ways you can build the deck.
how dare you?
How dare I? You don't like the word flexible? You don't like Paladin?
Nah, I'm just kidding. Paladin's pretty cool.
Well, okay. Giving me a rough time, Tej.
Yeah. I was actually sort of expecting a Shaman pick here from one of the teams.
Really?
Yeah. Because if you pick Shaman from the side of... it depends. I don't know. It's all about the mind games there. But
Shaman's okay right now.
Elemental Shaman actually has some really good matchups. If you look at the current popular decks in sort of... It does well against mid-range Paladin decks.
Okay.
And it does well against... Well, I guess it doesn't do well against other shamans necessarily.
Well, if you have
I mean-
an elemental shaman versus an elemental shaman, 100% of the time an elemental shaman will win.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
That's facts.
But I guess the Rogue has good matchups against Shaman almost always across the board.
Yeah.
And it can beat Paladin if they don't get off to a blistering start. So,
But if you have a fast paladin, it can get off to a blistering start, and if you have a very controlling paladin, then they can just clear off all the minions.
yeah. Yeah.
It's rough. Shaman's in a rough spot, I think.
Yeah, but Rogue also. I don't know. That's a tough situation for Chile to be in with their deck selection overall. But we'll have to see. It's probably Quest Rogue, but it could be Miracle Rogue.
Could be.
Don't count it out. And as for the Paladin deck, it could be a number of things. It could be a Control Paladin. It could be an Exhaust Control Paladin. It could be a mid-range Paladin, which is actually... I'm not even talking about Murlocs. I'm talking about mid-range Paladin, which has been picking up steam. Like with Lost in the Jungle, Lightfuse Stegadon,
Dudadin.
Vine Cleaver.
It's Dudadin, TJ.
Yeah, Dudadin.
It's the good stuff.
Idiotadin.
No.
But-
Recruitadin. 2 Armsadin.
But some would say all Paladins are idiotadins.
Got him.
Yeah, but it looks like it's going to be a very Murloc-centric Paladin deck. There is double Consecration. Now, double Consecration, while it is in some lists, a lot of players recently have been cutting a second copy of Consecration in order to put in the second copy of Blessing of Kings.
Makes sense.
Because a lot of times you already have the board going through the early game, so you don't necessarily need to clean up your opponents. You just need to start hitting them in the face and pushing damage. It also gives you reach in a situation where you'd otherwise be playing a deck that doesn't necessarily have reach, especially when your board starts to dwindle. So
Yeah.
I've been liking that inclusion. Japan does not pick up a one-drop Murloc, which is actually surprisingly important for Murloc Paladin decks is picking up that one-drop Murloc, because it just sort of unlocks everything else that they can do.
Well, the Paladin has almost a hunter-like start now in that it's so important that it curves out well. And that the minions synergize very well with each other, very similar to beasts. But the difference is that it has this moment where it just completely switches the game plan. If the Murlocs fail you, maybe they get a little bit of early damage in, maybe you control the board. But then you've got Stampeding Kodo, Sunkeeper Tarim, Curator, Tyrion, sometimes Stonehill Defenders to give you additional Tarims and Tyrions. You have all of that late game.
Spike-ridged Steed.
Yes, Spike-ridged Steed that you can switch your game plan to more of a controlling one if your aggressive failsafe doesn't follow through.
Yeah, you can even beat a quest rogue in sort of the later stages of the game.
You can.
Just by, going wide on the board and, Sunkeeper Tarim. There's also like Tyrion, which usually takes like 3 trades and then you get a bunch of damage. So if you put on early pressure, you can finish off the game. So there is a possibility with that, and it's one of the reasons why, many types of Paladin decks are favored against the rogue. But that's a decent start for Chile. They do have 2 bounce effects plus a card that you usually like to bounce. They do pick up Igneous Elemental, though, which might actually change their plan, because now they, right off the bat, have enough bounce effects to complete their quest. They have enough. With Igneous Elemental, that's double. Flame Elemental, that means with the 2 bounces, they're perfectly fine.
Yeah, so even with just the 4 cards in hand, they can complete the quest. It's going to take them a couple turns, and the Igneous Elemental does have the requirement that it needs to die. So, maybe Gundam Flame plays around that. Probably not, considering the nature of the Murloc deck. You need to actually play minions to kill your opponent.
Yeah.
And Chile will just eventually be able to run the Igneous Elemental into something, kill it off, and get the Flame Elemental train rolling.
Yeah, you can buff up the Igneous Elemental to avoid it from dying.
You could.
Let me think.
Bless your opponent's Igneous Elemental.
You can. Yeah. Just because then it encourages them to trade. No, that's a bad plan. I take it back.
Do we need a card called Murloc Slam?
No. That just wouldn't work. Just wouldn't.
You're right. I am but a fool.
It just wouldn't work. So now Japan thinking about whether or not they want to play Bluegill, Getaway Kodo, or just Hero Power. Getaway Kodo on Hydrologist, not necessarily the best. And they're also floating a mana. And Bluegill Warrior and the Silverhand Recruit basically just do the sort of same thing in the long run. You push an extra 3 damage, but that could be a lot more potential damage and you don't further your position on the board. So there's a race against time for Gundam Flame in Japan here, because
time is running out.
Once you see that Igneous Elemental come down,
you know what's up.
You know what's happening. And there's nothing you can do to stop it.
There really isn't. Like, you go into these matchups saying, okay, well, maybe the rogue draws poorly. Maybe they don't get what they need to finish the quest by turn 6 or 7. When does that ever actually happen?
Well, it happens quite a bit, but not when they're playing against you.
That's fair. That's accurate.
Yeah, the mythical bad rogue hand.
I guess it's happened. People talk about it a lot, but
yeah,
it's like Bigfoot. I've seen pictures, but I haven't seen it in person.
I hate to break it to you, but those pictures aren't real.
Okay, so it's like the Loch Ness Monster. I've seen pictures, but I haven't seen it in person.
I hate to break it to you, but the Loch Ness Monster is not real.
It's like Jade Stomp. Or Slam. I've heard rumors, but I haven't seen it.
That's one day going to be a real thing, so. All right, well, now, I mean, they're going to be able to finish the quest next turn.
I mean, they can ferry... Yeah, next turn.
Yeah.
Well, that means that they can't play it next turn.
They can't play it next turn unless they draw a preparation, but they're going to be able to finish it next turn, and that's probably good enough. Japan's going to have to make a very threatening board next turn if they are going to want to be able to stand up against the quest. And Japan has to know at this stage that all that's needed is one more bounce effect from Chile, and the quest is completed. And then it's usually all downhill from there. There are situations where you can sort of play the attrition game and just run them out of stuff. But the way the quest rogue is usually built is that they have so many ways to generate resources, even beyond just the bounce effects, you know. They have Mimic Pod, which, you know, gives you 2 5/5s of whatever cost. They have Novice Engineers that can draw, plus the bounce effects to draw even more. They have things that generate multiple tokens, like the Balefin Tidehunter. So all of a sudden that's one card that generates 2 5/5s. So it's hard to play that style, but sometimes you're forced into a position where you have to at least try.
It's just very hard to derail the quest rogue from their game plan. It's like they're playing their own game for the first, 4 or 5 turns. It's like they bring a game of solitaire up on their computer, they complete it, and then they're like, all right, now we can play our game of Hearthstone. This is really when it actually begins, once I've played the Crystal Core and all my minions are 5/5s.
Yeah.
But I mean, once they get to that point, there's only so much that you can do to really derail it. Yeah, you can try to run them out of cards. Like you said, they have a lot of generation. It's very difficult to do that. You can try to aggro them down, but even an aggressive Murloc build like this has had kind of a weak start.
Yeah, this was not a great start for Japan, to be honest. They missed their 1-drop. They also had probably their least impactful 2-drop with Hydrologist, at least for playing it on 2, Rockpool Hunter. 1-drop into Rockpool Hunter into the War Leader is
that's
the
very
curve
strong.
the curve that you're looking for, and the curve that becomes nearly unbeatable if you're the quest rogue in that situation.
If you go Vilefin, Rockpool, Murloc, War Leader.
Gentle Megasaur. You just
that's
win.
so
You win the
good.
game. Yeah, it's really good, and it's one of the reasons why this deck took off is because it, against most decks, it gets off to that start, it wins, and even if it doesn't, then it can play the long game. But against quest rogue, it can't necessarily do that as well. Chile testing for Noble Sacrifice there, and they hit face, so they can rule out Eye for an Eye. They can rule out Noble Sacrifice. And now they'll be able to rule out Repentance. So they can pretty much put it on being Redemption or Getaway Kodo at this stage. And just trying to block damage. Now, Japan has put on a significant amount of pressure. 18 is not the highest of health totals, but once those 5/5 start to be generated, it's so hard to push that additional damage, especially as Paladin, because outside of Blessing of Kings, Consecration, and True Silver, they don't have Burst from hand. So, and the Burst from hand relies on them being able to have minions sticking a lot of the time. And once you get to that point where you're just charging 5/5s, it's hard to get minions to stick.
Yeah. Well, wisely, Chile holds back the Flame Elemental, playing around Consecration, just being an additional removal of a 5/5 minion. And then this way they'll be able to play the Crystal Core, the Flame Elemental, as well as either Patches or the Boar, and get that immediate 5/5 charging effect. I mean, Japan, it's very unlikely that they run Equality in the deck. We did see 2 copies of Consecration, but...
Yeah, it's slim chance at this stage.
Yeah. Maybe a more control build of Paladin would have a better chance at this point, but you don't really want to get to that place in the game against Quest Rogue. You don't usually win from there.
Yeah. So they're going to just build, develop as big a board as they can. I was thinking maybe you go for Stonehill Defender in this case, just to try and look for the Sunkeeper Terran, to have something to fight back. But I suppose that that's always going to be something in their back pocket.
And this is a very threatening board.
Yeah, I mean, this is basically free trading into a 5/5 at this point, while pushing 11 damage feels really enticing.
Yeah.
And actually, this might be a, well, yeah.
I mean, Core comes down.
They just got to really hope that this is not Redemption, because they need to kill off these Murloc War Leaders. Yeah. And if they kill off one of Redemption comes up, all of a sudden they can't trade into the second one. And then they're going to be in a throwing position. But it is Getaway Kodo, so they will be able to remove 2 of these War Leaders off the board. And that'll cut into the damage significantly. But it's still not a guaranteed victory yet. They are at a point where they're running a little bit low on resources. If Sunkeeper Terran does come out, there might be a chance for Japan.
Well, this is going to leave the Seer and the Warrior on board with the War Leader going back to hand from the Getaway Kodo. So that's still going to be a fair amount of damage. if they can get to Tyrion,
Yeah, I think
maybe they're able to slow the game down enough.
I think they were afraid of redemption there.
Yeah. I mean, wisely so.
Yeah, but I mean, this is actually a lot of damage. That's 7 on board plus 4 from the
7,
Blue Gill
11.
Warrior. 15. That's a lot.
It's 3 off lethal. Is there any way that you can kill off the Flame Elemental and set up lethal at the same time?
Well, I mean,
Or
you
is
get
it just
Blessing of
good
King-
enough to...
You get Blessing of Kings, one of the minions on board. You probably want to protect the War Leader, so Blessing of Kings onto the Cold Seer, trade in, and then push 3. And then develop Hydrologist behind it, and then save the Blue Gill Warrior for burst. I don't know, but this actually is looking okay for Japan at this point. They have a lot of damage from hand. If Chile, slips up one turn, then they could have it. But the thing is, they have so many resources in there, and they have a charge to deal with one of the minions. They have Biolfin Tidehunter, which develops not only a 5/5, but also a 5/5 with Taunt. And Novice Engineer to maybe find some more resources. Maybe even a Vanish, which could help them a lot, especially with those boards that have been built up pretty heavily.
Is it right to just go all face? You could bless the War Leader, play the Bluegill, just go in.
Ooh, Eye for an Eye. Eye for an Eye actually...
Really smart.
Yeah, Eye for an Eye can be really good because a lot of times you just block the damage. They have to attack with their dagger in first. But this is an annoying board to deal with, and Japan's still holding on to that 6 damage at least burst from hand with Blue Gill Warrior for Blessing of Kings. If a War Leader lives on the board, all of a sudden it's 8 from hand.
Well, Chile has, had potentially 15 bursts this turn. But this is also going to be a big couple of walls for Japan to have to get over.
The Grey Wall of Ooze.
Yes, very famous in Chilean culture.
Yeah. The Eye for an Eye can also just throw things off a little bit. I had a game that I was playing, I think it was like it was yesterday, where I wasn't even thinking. I had Noble Sacrifice in my head, and I just attacked. I was at 4 health and just attacked with a 5/5 into the Paladin's face, and Eye for an Eye killed me. And I was like really mad at myself, but I was like, that didn't even cross my brain for some reason because he had played 2 Hydraulics already that game. Or he played a Hydraulics already that game, and it was a Noble Sacrifice, and so it just stuck in my brain. And
You just don't think about it.
yeah, I guess with 4 people, you probably think about it. But
There's not that many Paladin secrets left to think about.
yeah. And this is lethal just presented on board.
Is there any way they can shut it down? I mean,
Well, I mean, they can
Blessing Stonehill? No.
they can kill off one of these 5/5s, so they won't be staring at lethal, but any charge minion would represent it. And they can't even set up a situation where they can win with Eye for an Eye if they attack in with a 5/5. It's
And Blessing plus Bluegill means that they can kill both of the taunts. Then that's only 20 represented on board for Nephew.
Move quickly.
I think they just have to start chipping away at some of these 5/5s. It's the only way. That hurts.
It's very bad. It looked like they might have been in it. But like you said, you don't need to Shadow Step for lethal. You can just Shadow Step or Ferryman or Brewmaster for an additional 5/5.
Yeah. All right, well, if they pick up one more charge minion here from this Novice Engineer, they win, or Bounce Effect. Either one would win the game. Let's see what it is. Firefly, not quite there.
But pretty darn close.
Yeah, might as well clear things off the board. You don't want to give them a chance to trade back with some Keeper Tarum, I guess. Also, I mean, if you have 6 5/5s on the board, you're going to be feeling pretty good regardless. And just going to play around a quality Consecration, I guess, by not playing the Flame Elemental. I understand keeping the charge in hand, but
Yeah. No way that Gundam Flame can put Nephew down to 5 and try to set up a sneaky Eye for an Eye lethal.
Now, Tyrion, they're not dead on board, but if they play Tyrion, they're dead with a charge minion in hand. So you can see Gundam Flame.
If they were able to play Tyrion and Eye for an Eye this turn, they might have won. But alas, only 8 mana.
Potentially. Well, no, because the damage still goes through with Eye for an Eye.
It would have been a tie.
Yeah, that's true. Would have been a tie. But unfortunately, not a tie. And Chile is going to take the game and thus take the series. And a pretty crucial win for them as they were floating down at the bottom of the standings for their group. And this is a tough loss for Japan.
Yeah, Chile, I believe, was 0-1 in the Hearthstone Global Games before this. So now they're going to go up to a 1-1 record, which is not so bad considering they've only played 2 games. Some teams have played as much as 4 up until this point. Each team will play 5 before it is decided which teams will move on to the second stage of this tournament. But a 1-1 record's not so bad for one of the South American teams that I think was pretty underrated.
Yeah, and Japan's going to have to go back to the drawing board for the future weeks. They are now sort of floating towards the bottom of the standings themselves.
Yeah.
And so, they effectively have to win out from here if they want to make it to the next group stage. There are some chances where they can lose one more, but it's very unlikely. So, I know they have a lot of strong players on their team, but today it just didn't pan out. And, maybe they have to change up their deck selection. Maybe they just have to try and throw some curveballs at their opponents. But they played a straightforward game today, and the straightforward game just didn't work out.
I mean, to be fair, their decks weren't bad. I think the matchups really didn't go their way. The fact that they got Jade Druid versus the Dragon Priest wasn't very good. Paladin versus Quest Rogue also not great. And then the Mage versus the Jade Druid. They were all pretty poor matchups when it comes down to it. So maybe just a bit of an off week for Japan. But ultimately, Chile takes that win 3-1. And they are going to soak themselves up an additional win in the Hearthstone Global Games. So they looked very strong. Nephew picked up a win for himself and Machine, who was not able to play with the team today. And then, of course, Topo Pablo, who was a representative of Chile at the Americas Summer Championship in 2016. So overall, the team looked really strong to me.
Yeah, they did. And, I like the decks that they brought. Just pretty straightforward from them. The last match, I feel like that Paladin should have had a good matchup, but, man, Japan just missed some of those crucial draws. No Rockpool Hunter being drawn, no 1-drop until really later on in the game, and the Tyrion being dead in the hand for so long. You can't afford to have, those types of draws against Quest Rogue, because Quest Rogue is the deck that's going to eat apart slow decks and bad draws, more so than any other deck in Hearthstone right now. So they were able to pull it out, and Japan, they can't get too down on themselves because they still have chances to make it out of the first group stage. And, it's tough when you look at these ones because you're like, well, what could we have done better? Maybe they just try and bring some weird decks. Maybe they try and, throw curveballs at their opponents by bringing decks that they didn't bring last week to throw it off. So there are things that they can do differently, but it's about what. And now looking at the standings, there's Japan. They're all the way down at the bottom. That's a pretty far ways down compared to what they were at the beginning of the day today.
Yes, but looking at them, they're still tied up with Norway and Finland. Unfortunately, their game record is worse than both Finland and Norway. And if it does come down to tied match scores, then game score will be the tiebreaker initially. So they are in last place. They do still have a couple more matches. Maybe they can bring up their record. And, if Israel or Chile falter, moving on, then it's possible still that Japan is able to get that game score up, get that match score up, and push themselves up within Group E. But right now it's looking like Italy just sort of has the #1 spot on lock with the 3-0 record. And Chile has moved up with a 1-1.
Yeah, Italy been dominating Group E, and they're set to basically qualify for the next group stage already. I don't think there's a way that they can't. So they're
even if
already
they go
through.
3-2,
With their game score right now, I believe they're 9-3 or 9-4.
Yeah.
They're in a pretty good spot, so they should be set. But we'll see. That group is going to be interesting to see how it plays out once everything's said and done. We'll see if Japan can bounce back.
Yep, still a lot of questions, still a lot up in the air.